This is a housing development site in Glynneath. In this video, we will see how Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Department malpractice has placed the health and the lives of the neighbouring residents at risk for the last 10 years. We will see which elected members of the council are covering up this malpractice and are refusing to observe its purpose, which is the Neath-Port Talbot County Borough Council exists to serve and represent the interests of its citizens and communities. We strive to improve the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of our people. We will see how Neath-Port Talbot Council have breached the 1990 Environmental Protection Act by failing to follow the contaminated land strategy, which is based upon the requirements of this Act. Contamination identified. In 2005, Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Committee approved planning permission for a development at Heol Glyn in Glynneath. They placed a list of conditions on the planning permission which the developer had to meet in order for them to complete the development. One of these conditions was that a geotechnical survey of the ground be submitted. The geotechnical survey was submitted to the planning department at Neath-Port Talbot Council on the 26th of November 2008. The report found that of the 6 soil samples that were sent for chemical testing, 4 tested above the required safety levels for the presence of a recognised contaminant. 3 contaminants were identified above the safety level. 2 of these contaminants were Grade 1 classified carcinogens, arsenic and a polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon called benzo-A-pyrene. The geotechnical report provided evidence that the land should be remediated, that is, cleaned up because of the danger to human health. The report also included a remediation strategy, a clean-up operation to protect the site end users, the new homeowners, from the contamination. What identifies land as contaminated in the eyes of the UK and Welsh governments is the identification of a source to receptor pathway and the significant possibility of harm to human health. The report provided evidence of a source to receptor pathway and so identified the significant possibility of harm to human health. This being the case, the land then required further investigation and/or remediation by UK law. This law is the Environmental Protection Act 1990. What should have happened? The Neath-Port Talbot Council's responsibilities at this point in time were contained in the contaminated land strategy. If we look at the executive summary of the contaminated land strategy, we will see that it immediately aligns itself with Part 2A of the 1990 Environmental Protection Act, and then bases its contaminated land processes on this Act. The executive summary of this document states, Part 2A of the Environment Protection Act 1990 was introduced in Wales on 1st of July 2001. Until this time, there had been no strategic approach to the identification of contaminated land. Land contamination had always been addressed during redevelopment or when the risk has manifested itself. Since 2001, all local authorities have a duty to inspect their areas, locate and ensure the remediation of all statutory designated contaminated land. One of the key objectives of the Council's Contaminated Land Strategy, Key Objective 4, is to ensure that during the redevelopment of new sites, land contamination issues are dealt with effectively and at an early stage of the planning process. The land was identified as contaminated, and so the planning department should have then passed on this information to the contaminated land officer. There is no evidence of either department having undertaken any actions relating to the contamination. What did happen? The application containing the geotechnical survey with the contamination information was withdrawn on the 2nd of April 2009. No reason was given for its withdrawal, and the geotechnical survey or contamination contained within it were never referred to again during the planning process. If we refer to the Contaminated Land Strategy document on page 15, it states, "The main objective of the conditions is to ensure suitable investigation work is carried out and that the land is remediated to a standard that is suitable for the proposed end use. If the contamination was to be dealt with, we would find it in the next set of conditions approved for the development." The next set of plans were approved on the 23rd of April 2010. The conditions did not mention contamination or chemical testing, and there is no record of any remediation on the site. Neath-Port Talbot Council have clearly ignored the 2008 contamination report. Therefore, Neath-Port Talbot Council have failed to follow their contaminated land strategy. If we look again at the executive summary of the Contaminated Land Strategy, we will see that it immediately aligns itself with Part 2A of the 1990 Environmental Protection Act. All local authorities have a duty to inspect their areas, locate and ensure the remediation of all statutory designated contaminated land. If we look at the Act itself, Environmental Protection Act 1990, Part 2A, Identification of Contaminated Land, the opening points of which are 1. Every local authority shall cause its area to be inspected from time to time for the purpose A. of identifying contaminated land and B. of enabling the authority to decide whether any such land is land which is required to be designated as a special site. We will see that the Neath-Port Talbot Council failed to observe point B of Part 2A of the Act, which required further investigation to identify if the site was a special site. The presence of benzoapyrene would suggest the possibility that the land could be a special site. The governing authority for contaminated land in 2008 was the UK Government's Environment Agency. So if we refer to two similar examples at English county boroughs, Slough and Reading, we will see that they further investigated, identified benzoapyrene contamination and designated land containing benzoapyrene as contaminated. If we then look at the information provided, we will see that it is clear that the Neath-Port Talbot Council have failed to follow the processes outlined in the Contaminated Land Strategy in relation to the identified contamination. In the absence of any counter-evidence, it must therefore be accepted that the Neath-Port Talbot Council, in failing to follow the processes contained in the Contaminated Land Strategy, have thereby breached Part 2A of the 1990 Environmental Protection Act, willfully endangering the lives and health of the residents of Glynneath. Accountability. The Planning Department are initially accountable for the breach. The Planning Department are regulated by Neath-Port Talbot Council's elected council members, and their decisions are overseen by a group of county councillors who make up the Planning Committee. It is this committee's job to undertake due diligence when overseeing the Planning Department's recommendations. We have supplied this information to 15 Neath-Port Talbot councillors in a 16-page document on the 7th of September 2020, including 13 members of the Planning Committee. Our document offered Neath-Port Talbot Council the opportunity to provide counter-evidence to the information and allegations made in the document. To date, 8th of November 2020, no response from Neath-Port Talbot Council has been received apart from a generic statement from the council leader which labelled our document as misinformation. Previous to this, we have dealt with the council leader and planning department. We have made them aware of the breach as far back as April 2020. The council leader and the planning department have attempted to cover up the malpractice with generic statements such as the contamination is low and the Environmental Protection Act is not enforceable during the planning process. No documentary evidence has been offered by the council to support these claims. If we refer again to the council's purpose, the Neath-Port Talbot Council exists to serve and represent the interests of its citizens and communities. We strive to improve the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of our people. The following Neath-Port Talbot councillors have been made aware of the breach and are covering up the malpractice by refusing to observe the purpose and values of the council and make accountable the members of the Planning Department who breached the Environmental Protection Act in 2010. Councillor Suzanne Paddison, the Chairperson of the Planning Committee. Councillor Sean Percy, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee. Councillor Christopher John Jones, Planning Committee. Councillor Dennis Keogh, Planning Committee. Councillor Rydian Misen, Planning Committee. Councillor Scott Bamsey, Planning Committee. Councillor Rosalind Davis, Planning Committee. Councillor Steve Hunt, Planning Committee. Councillor Annette Wingrave, Planning Committee. Councillor Arwyn N. Woolcock, Planning Committee. Councillor Chris Williams, Planning Committee. Councillor Suzanne Renkes, Planning Committee. Councillor Mark Prothero, Planning Committee. Councillor Simon Noyle, Glynneath. Councillor Del Morgan, Glynneath. Council Leader, Councillor Rob Jones. Finally, we will end with the Neath-Port Talbot Council value. We will conduct the work of the Council in an open and accessible way, ensuring we are properly accountable for the decisions we make.